couple seconds, and I'll let you know. I'll let you know
Oh,
when it shows live.
okay, sounds good.
Awesome. Okay, everybody. So I have, well, first, welcome everybody to the channel, and I appreciate everyone showing up like this on a Friday. Although I pop up on Fridays every now and then like this. If you have any issues hearing me or hearing my guest James, just let me know in the chat. I'm paying attention to the chat right now. And right now, what I have is an experienced pilot with us named James, and it's going to be a really interesting and spectacular conversation. So, James, welcome to the channel.
Thanks a
Um, I
lot. Appreciate that.
Absolutely. And anybody out there, if you have any issues hearing myself or James, let us know. We'll get right to it and fix it. But as it says in the description, James, you're a pilot, and can we start there? Like your just you don't have to be too specific, but like your career as a pilot, like is it commercial? Is it? I mean, what kind of pilot are you?
In private aviation,
Okay. So does private mean like wealthy people flying wealthy people around?
yeah, most of the time it's wealthy people who want to fly privately. It's people who want to take cargo privately, those types of things. So either they own their own plane or
Mhm.
they charter aircraft. Those are usually the two ways people fly privately.
Understood. Understood. So we started to get into, but I knew that it was something that was very interesting about. If you just want to jump into that, that would be wonderful about the way in which planes fly and the way in which the Earth actually works whenever a plane is in the air. And if you could just kind of rewind like a minute back there,
Sure, yeah.
awesome, awesome.
Well, when the flight path is being calculated, and how we're going to go from A to B, there are when you look at a typical map like you would Google, it shows the map where the continents are kind of laid out horizontally. Everything's but really the map is laid out differently. If you go to a website called the Great Circle Mapper, you can go on there and you can type in destinations and it'll show you flight paths, and they're always showing them in a curve. And the reason why they show that is they don't want to show you the real layouts. Planes fly in a straight line from point A to point B, whether they're getting gas or whether they're going directly to their destination. And so there's a map called the Gleason's map from 1892. That map is identical to what you would see on the United Nations flag for their logo. And a lot of people call that the flat Earth map, but the real truth is it's just the Gleason's map. That's a map that's accurate for planning flight paths. And we don't actually pull out that map and say we're going to plan a flight path. It's all digital these days. But when you look at the flight paths, it fits perfectly over that. That's what I'm trying to say.
I understand. So you were describing in our correspondence, you were describing how curvature, and you were describing sort of how when a plane flies, the speed of the plane versus what we're telling the rotation of the Earth is. Would you mind getting into that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. When a plane flies, they don't compensate for the rotation of the Earth, east to west, north to south. So, for example, if you're flying from New York to LA and you're going 500 miles an hour, which is a reasonable amount of speed to go in a plane, and the Earth's rotating from west to east, that means that you're going to get to LA at 1,500 miles an hour if the Earth was spinning like that. And people say, well, the atmosphere goes along with the Earth; it'll rotate with it. Well, if that were true, then the winds wouldn't, blow at different directions than what the Earth is spinning. The same way, the other direction, if you're going from LA to New York and the Earth's spinning at 1,000 miles an hour, you'd never get there because you'd always be playing catch up. And north to south the same way. So planes don't compensate for that. So it's one thing that people might not think about it. Well, as most pilots don't even question that. They're just like, well, this is just how the Earth is, and But it's something that I think about when flying, and I wanted to bring that to your attention in our correspondence to get people thinking. Really, it's about critical thinking.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I appreciate you talking about these kinds of things because I don't think people really take that I don't think people think about at least I didn't. How about that? I've never thought about it the way that you broke it down to me, and that's why I have you on the show now because I never thought about having to compensate for things like that. So so you're saying that what about also too, what about curvature? How come curvature you're saying curvature isn't part you're just assuming or the way that it's set up, the setup that we have right now and the trajectory of the plane itself, it's basically set up for a flat plane, right? It's not set up for a ball, especially for long flights.
Correct, yes. And one example is that when a plane's going 500 miles an hour, it travels 8.3 miles every minute. So on a ball Earth, the trigonometry says that there's 66 feet of drop off past the horizon every 10 miles, which means that the plane would constantly need to adjust its nose downwards in order to compensate for its forward motion. And people will say, well, gravity is just pulling the nose of the plane downward. But then the question would be, why would gravity be biased to the front of the plane and not the back of the plane? Or somebody would say, well, the curve is so gradual, the plane's going to follow. But the truth is, if the plane doesn't compensate, then over 30 minutes of time, it's going to gain an altitude of 2,000 feet high. And that's not good. So planes don't compensate for that. They just fly straight. And people don't really think about it. When they look at pictures of NASA, they look at how big the Earth is and like, oh, this little plane, it's just going to follow along the curve naturally. But the trigonometry for a ball Earth suggests otherwise. But it's something people don't usually think about, and that's why I like to inspire people to think critically, to investigate things for themselves, to look stuff up, things like that.
So what about things like the Coriolis effect? What do you say to that?
The Coriolis effect. Remind me what that is?
So Jimbo, why don't you remind us since you brought that up? Let's Google this real quick here. I think it has to do with like being in a car. Basically, the car can be going like 80 miles an hour, but because you're in the car, and I'm looking this up as I say it, as you're in the car, you can still not feel it. I
I
think
see.
that's pretty much the Coriolis effect, I believe, in a nutshell. It's here an effect whereby a mass moving in a rotating system experiences a force, the Coriolis effect, acting perpendicular to the direction of the motion and the axis of the rotation. On the Earth, the effect tends to deflect moving objects to the right of the northern hemisphere and to the left of the southern, and is important in the formation of the cyclonic weather systems. So
Hmm.
is there any kind of it says here in physics the Coriolis effect is the inertial or does it say fastidious force that acts on objects that are in motion within a frame of reference that rotates with respect to an inertial frame. So in reference frame with clockwise rotation, the force acts as the left motion of the object. Right. So yeah. So how do you think that could play into that? Not I'm ignorant. I don't know. I have no idea. But I would think it would be something like when you're kind of in a car, and that would be a kind of comparison to the Earth's atmosphere. Um, so let's see what Jimbo here says. Way back when it was done with a cannonball. So with the artillery, you compensate for the rotation, for the motion off the ground. Huh. So I'm not sure what Jimbo here is trying to um, see. Uh, it's about
It's
being off ground. Okay, okay. The
it
motion
seems
off
like
ground.
that would imply that the entire atmosphere is moving along with the rotation of the Earth. Therefore, if you're in a helicopter and you're just hovering, the idea is that you're going along with the Earth. The Earth is pulling the helicopter along with it. That seems
Mhm.
like that would be what the Coriolis effect would imply, if I understand it correctly.
Yeah, and it sounds to me like the Coriolis effect, you're right, it would have to, the atmosphere would, all of it would have to be moving in one direction all at one time, and it would have to all entirely be almost in an equal equation with the plane itself in order for it to work as if you're in that car. Because when you're stuck inside of a car, the atmosphere is definitely settled. There's no left side of the car that's having a hurricane. Right side of the car is having the jet stream dip down. There's nothing like that in the car.
Hmm.
So, certainly not. Now I'm starting to get the picture here. All right, so that's very interesting. So, as a pilot, and you're noticing these kinds of things, I know a lot of channels like to talk about the idea of the strange flight patterns.
Hmm.
Do pilots ever talk about that among themselves, or have you thought about that, or what is that about? What is that all about?
Well, like for example, if you're in the southern part of the hemisphere, so to speak, and you're down in Johannesburg, South Africa, and you want to take a flight over to Argentina, if you look at a regular map, it looks like it just should be a quick jump across the Atlantic, and boom, there you are. But when you look at it on a Gleason's map, and then you actually plot the flight, you have to go up north and then back down south because that's exactly how the continents are laid out correctly on the Gleason's map. And then it's like, oh, now it makes sense why I have to go way up by Dubai and then way back down south to get there. And then things start to make sense like that. It's like, then starts to get things thinking. But usually topics like that are taboo. People don't want to talk about it. They feel that it might jeopardize something in their career or their reputation. Kind of like the way UFO, people didn't want to talk about UFOs as pilots because then they would think, well, then that might be a psychological issue that I might not pass the psych test or something like that for getting my pilot's license.
Right, right. And I notice for myself, something that really bothers me, and I see this all the time, and I read this all the time about the moon and the sun. I see them almost side by side all the time. And I always read in Google, and I've read it in other articles about the way in which it works. It's usually the first quarter of the morning or the first quarter in the evening that you can see the two together. I've seen the two together whenever I'm driving home. Hey, Jay, Chris, how you doing, man? Thank you. Hit that like button. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And also, too, someone else gave a super chat. Peter, thank you so much for that. Anybody wants to give the super chat? All the money, we've all talked about it. We're going to try to put it towards a website. That way, we can kind of be if this site ever gets shut down, we're going to kind of have our own place to go, just in case.
It's a good
So,
idea.
yeah, yeah. Jay Chris is awesome. Also, his channel is awesome. Check out his channel. Great guy, great channel, great message. Just a great atmosphere, folks. I highly recommend it. All right, sorry, I didn't mean to jump away from there, but um, so I have problems with that because I'll be driving at lunchtime, and I've seen the moon on one side and the sun on the other. Um, and I've always loved the idea. I've said I love the belligerence and sort of the sort of charged atmosphere the whole flat earth thing brings about. And certainly now that I have contact with an anonymous government contractor, he certainly has told me things now that have certainly shaken up my world. And that was before and that was actually after post you and I talking, because you and I have been in correspondence for a long, long time. And I've
Hmm.
been meaning to have you on for a while. And I gotta tell you, man, I gotta tell you, the things he's told me have blown my mind because I've always wanted to stick to a particular idea about the planet and the way that the mechanics of the planet itself, simply because I've already got enough on my plate. I don't need this as well. But
Right.
I
Yeah.
thought, right, but I thought having you on here would help out quite a bit. Someone says the Coriolis effect is bunk. And someone else is arguing about how artillery works. I'm sorry, I'm not keeping up with the chat. I'm kind of flying solo here, folks. Thank you, Lisa W. That's awesome. Thank you for the super chat. So, so are you saying, is there an atmosphere of would you say it's either fear, or would you say people simply don't pay attention? Have Let me put it another way. Has there ever been a point where a pilot started to speak up, and the powers that be, whether it be, whomever, federal people, or the businesses that own the planes, Have you seen anyone speak up and they were, somehow punished in a way? Is it that kind of atmosphere?
I have not personally experienced that. Not to say that it doesn't happen, but I've not been with a first or even secondhand experience of it. I've heard
Hmm.
about it from other people to say, well, yeah, so, whether you watch it on a YouTube and you hear some pilots talking or whatever, but not from me talking to someone or from someone telling me directly, hey, Joe Smith did this and this is what happened to them. I can't say that that's happened.
Right, right, right. So, but it's got to be. I mean, come on, it's got to be. You guys are doing this all the time. You
Mhm.
don't have to accommodate for the atmosphere. You don't have to accommodate for the tilt of the earth. You fly in strange patterns. It, the horizon is always flat. I've been up in commercial flights as everyone else has on a clear day. I've yet to see any kind of curvature whatsoever. What do you? I mean, is it just something that is just so ingrained as a pilot that it's just something you do not mention? Because at some point, someone's got to say something in the cockpit where you guys are like, this is ridiculous, right?
Yeah, it's one of those things where when people are comfortable, they don't want to make changes. And that's what's hard about learning the truth about anything is you have to step out of comfort and then you have to start to accept whatever change that is or whatever truth that is. When you're standing on the beach and you look at a boat out on the horizon, about 9 miles out, maybe 12, it starts to disappear, not because the boat goes over the curvature, just because of perspective. And
Hmm.
so if there's curvature at 12 miles going forward, then why wouldn't there be curvature at 12 miles going left to right when you're looking out the front of the airplane? And so on a ball Earth, the trigonometry would be the same, but it's not. And people just really, when you're up in the airplane, you're going 500 miles an hour at 40,000 feet, 50,000 feet. It feels like you're just walking slowly. You're creeping along. And people don't really, I don't think that it really dawns on them how fast they're really going and what the mathematics says. And that's why I encourage people to look at websites like the Great Circle Mapper. You can go on there and put in Johannesburg to Buenos Aires. Look and see for yourself what is this flight path and why. And then do a screen grab of it and then look at different maps. Look at the Gleason's map and then look at the way that path is. And you can see that, oh, well, the continents are laid out differently on the Gleason's map, which is the map of the UN flag, than on other maps. And then things start to make sense. And when people start to do a little investigation for themselves, that helps with the wake up process. And then it's up to them to decide, do they want to be comfortable and just, put their fingers in their ears, shut their eyes, or do they want to get uncomfortable and start to think about different ideas and grow? And I think
Right.
that's what's great about your channel. Your channel really encourages people to do that same thing.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Um, how early on in your career, or was it as early as flight school, that you started to notice the math wasn't adding up and what you were experiencing versus what was being said? How early on was it for you that you knew something was off? Was it just like the first flight when you knew you were that high up and you should be doing adjustments and you didn't have to?
No, in the beginning, it's the thrill of, hey, I'm flying in an airplane. I'm doing something that's really cool, exciting. I'm not going to buck the system. I'm going to trust what I'm being told. It's later on when I start to look at other things, other ideas, and start to watch YouTube's by Eric Dubay and look at different look at different perspectives. And then I start to think, how does this apply to me in my life? And then I have to start, then I go on a website. What is the earth ball trigonometry? You go to a secular website that shows here's the mathematics for it. And this person who wrote that trigonometry for people to go on there and find the drop off, they're not flat earthers, they're ball earthers. And they want, and so you can use that. You can say, okay, well, what would this be if I'm going 500 miles an hour? Well, gosh, it's going to fall off 66 feet every so many minutes. Well, what do I do when I'm flying? And people will say, well, the plane's just falling along the curve of the earth, and that's what's expected to be accepted. And it's not that those people are bad or nothing. It's just that that's what they're taught, and then they're teaching other people and so on, and kind of like school.
So, Jason brings up a great point here. And this has been known as a big Mandela effect. And I remember this too because I used to fly from San Francisco to the East Coast, and it used to be much farther. And now he mentions New York to California. I was San Francisco to pretty much the DC area, but it was right around the 3,400 mile mark back in the mid to late 90s, whenever I was far younger, like college age. And he has now it's saying 2,400 to 2,700 miles. That's another thing I wanted to get to with you. Are you noticing through different Mandela effect shifts? Are you noticing, or do you remember, should I say, do you remember kind of the distances? Are they changing? Any geography that you're noticing is different? And everyone, I haven't actually talked to, I haven't prepped, I haven't done anything like this. I'm actually asking on the fly um with James here. So what do you think about that?
I haven't noticed big changes in distances going from LA to New York, as an example. I
Mhm.
noticed that South America is to the east, shifted to the east, but it's not like one day I woke up and suddenly this flight plan that we were going to do today is hugely different. It's that it's more of, wasn't that, when you look at a map, it's like, well, wasn't that different? I'm not sure. And there's that fog there. Just like,
Mhm.
where's the island to the west of Australia? I remember that in school. I can't remember for the life of me what it's called, but it slips away. And then you start to think back, well, I think there was. I'm pretty sure there was. I remember an island to the west of Australia, and now it's not there. I remember South America being over to the west more. Now it's over to the east. How that
Mhm.
affects me as a pilot, I think it's the Mandela effect blends things together in a way that does cause the gray area. If, for example, like let's say you're going to New York and you know that New York is, from Ohio is so many hours away. And then as you're flying, the instruments say, hey, it's another 6 hours. You would know definitely something's wrong. So I don't think it's that blatant. I think it's more subtle.
Interesting. So it could be a more progressive thing, and what happens is, perhaps, and I'm speculating here, in me's what happens is you wake up and finally there comes a tipping point where you go, okay, South America, the continent, is east of where it used to be, and maybe it wasn't a mega shift, it was kind of a progression, and it happened just overnight, like, and that's the fog, because I certainly Jay Chris he's right. I remember that specifically, that it was over 3,000 miles and now it's well under. And the flight, I remember too. I remember specifically the flight because I used to always have a layover in Chicago, and it's very different now. It's very different going coast to coast. So, interesting. Someone else in the chat had some other interesting questions too, but I got so into what you were saying, I've actually forgot. Are there other things that you've noticed just as a pilot? I mean, because there's things I don't know what I don't know, and you may know something else as well that you're free. The floor is yours, please, if you want to talk about it.
Sure. One of the things that it's not a Mandela effect notice. It's more of, when we talk about sea level, but then we talk about the Earth being a ball. Well, how can sea ever be level if it's a ball? And for example, if you know in Phoenix, Arizona, the elevation is 1,000 feet above sea level, but the
Mhm.
Pacific Ocean is over 350 miles away. Therefore, at sea level in Los Angeles, it's actually 81,000 feet below Phoenix on a ball Earth. So if we really are on a ball Earth, the actual level of the sea is 81,000 feet below Phoenix because
Wow.
it's curving way down. And so then the question becomes, well, how can we calculate sea level if it's where is that starting point to calculate the level of the sea? Where is our starting point?
Do you think that most of people who are engineers and people who pilots and all kinds of other professions, do you think that they're relying on people's ignorance of math?
I think the short answer is yes. I think people rely on what makes sense. Even if it's wrong and it makes sense, people can rely on it. I think it always goes back to comfort. And that's why it's harder to lose weight than it is to gain weight, because it's more comfortable to eat these comfort foods and then you gain weight, but it's harder to resist against it. So when it comes to the mathematics, you look at the trigonometry for a ball. Well, we have balls. I mean, there's beach balls and there's soccer balls, and they all have the same trigonometry that applies to them. So the math itself is not wrong. It's just the question of when you apply it to a ball that's 24,000 miles in diameter, the math is still right. Just the question is, does somebody want to apply it to that? And to answer your question about the engineers, those guys are, they have jobs, they have careers, they're trying to make a living. And if you go to your job and you start bucking the system too much, you lose credibility and you lose your career. And so if they get a paycheck and it's comfortable and they're fine with it and they can accept that in their life, I think people just usually go with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
What
think
about
that's human nature.
now? I know a big Mandela effect, and one that I've noticed recently because I was on a plane very recently, just 2 weeks ago. What about engines? They're that's a big Mandela effect with a lot of people. Have you noticed that engines, where they are in terms of the wing itself has changed?
I've seen a lot of videos on that. And on the commercial planes, they got the engines below the wing pushed forward. I see a lot of people say, well, I remember the engines being directly underneath the wing or behind the wing. The idea is that those engines want to grab that air before it hits the wing, because then the wing creates a bunch of turbulence. You don't want the turbulent air going into the engine afterwards. And so I don't know if that's a Mandela effect that's affected me, because I always remember the commercial planes having the engines pushed forward of the wing slightly so they can grab that air before it hits the leading edge of the wing. With the planes that have the engines on the back, like the long planes, the MD-88s, with the wings up by the engines up by the tail,
Right.
that those have been around too. So I don't. When I watch those videos, I really try hard to see if that applied to me. I don't remember the engines being different than they are now.
Okay. Okay. So what about okay, someone's asking in the chat, and I don't know a lot about the jet fuel hoax. I don't
Oh
know.
yeah,
Okay. Oh, you know about this. Okay.
I've seen
Uh
a lot of videos on it too. Jet engines do use fuel. Basically a jet engine is,
oh,
if you know what a turbocharger is on a car. If you take away the car engine and all you have left is a turbocharger, that's basically what a jet engine is. It brings in air and compresses it, then it mixes it with the fuel, and then it combusts to push thrust out the back. And so I don't know why people think jets might not use fuel, except for this fact. When a jet engine starts up, it uses compressed air to get the whole thing going. So this giant
mm,
air compressor that starts that turbine spinning and spinning, and it has to get up to a certain RPM before fuel is introduced. Then it's self-sustaining. Then that engine can run by itself. So maybe if someone said, well, jet engines start up by using compressed air, someone may have thought, well, maybe that's how they run completely, just on compressed air. And it's partially true. It does compress the air with those turbines, and it squeezes it way down and then mixes it with the fuel, and then bam, there's your thrust. So yeah, it is a weird. I have seen a lot of those videos about the no jets not having fuel, but I know that the jets we fly on, they pump fuel in them. They have fuel tanks. Some jets have auxiliary fuel tanks. Some fuel tanks more than others. And so unless I'm missing something big, I'm not sure why there would be a hoax to put
right.
fuel in planes.
No, I understand. And something about that math thing too, someone mentioned that math doesn't always equal reality. I have my own kind of spin, if I could filibuster for a second here.
Yeah.
I do statistics, and I do a lot of data mining, and I do things like that. And I know the kind of mathematics I use. The way that I deliver, and like what you're talking about, the way that I deliver my data to my customer, I can make that data look any way I want if I was a dishonest person.
Hmm.
And then there comes a time when you have different calculations, and you, especially in deep data mining, is what I do, and you can, depending on the variables that you use inside of an equation, you can vastly change the way in which mathematics is used. So when people proclaim and they scream to the heavens, it's basically in the math. They know very well. They either they don't know the math very well, and they and or they're being dishonest because they, like you said, applying it in the real world, that's the variables that they're not applying in the real world when they talk about things like trigonometry and other things whenever you apply to a globe earth or anything else. And I know that that's the comparison that I use whenever I use something closer to an algebraic formula, but nonetheless I understand the basic concepts behind those kinds of things whenever you try to have math versus math in the real world. And that's the point that I want to make to a lot of people, is that a lot of this is not practically applied. And that's why I like to talk to pilots. That's why I like to talk to doctors, because a lot of this is just theory. That's why I'm so happy that you're on the show with me now, because you're proving that no matter what, people can draw it out and they can write the math out and all of those things, and we can talk about the Coriolis effect. But it's really just like with data mining, it's like anything else. If you can do anything you want with those numbers, and until you hit the ground in the real world, and then suddenly the numbers don't match, and people suddenly want to start playing around with variables. And that's really what's happening in terms of the battle that's going along, or that's happening right now in the mind of human beings, whether or not we are in this flat earth, round earth, a realm, whatever it may be. And I just, for people who immediately want to proclaim because math, it's just like the because science argument, I can jump
Hmm.
in right now and just say because variables. That's why. As soon as you put a different number in the variable, you can have that same equation and it can go crazy haywire. So that was
Right.
my minute of filibustering about math. So
That's great. That's great.
well,
What I decide.
no,
Go
please
ahead.
go ahead. No, please, please.
What I had decided years ago was, instead of me saying, "Here's what I want my reality to be," whether it's my religious views or whatever, and then I'm going to decide how everything's going to fit into it. There's too much room for error and turning my head to the truth. I decided that, you know what, I don't care what the truth is. I just want to know what the truth is. If it's a flat earth, a ball earth, if it's a cube or whatever, it didn't matter to me. And that liberated me from being stressed out about facts. I said to myself, I want to know what the truth is about certain things.
Mhm.
And I don't care what the result is. Instead of saying, "Hey, this is my religious belief, therefore all my facts have to fit into this mold," that wasn't liberating. So I had to look at it the other way. And that's when I started to wake up to so many things.
Mhm.
That's when I started to wake up to the Mandela effect and started to wake up to the earth not being a sphere according to my observations, according to my experiences, according to my own research. Not that I wanted it to be flat, it's just, hey, all these facts are pointing to it's not a sphere. I don't know what the outer shape is, but I'm telling you that pilots don't compensate for this and that pilots don't compensate for that. Therefore, it's going to be really hard for it to be a ball.
Well said. And yeah, you're right. I'm going to re-augment this conversation to, this is not a flat earth versus a ball earth. This is me talking to a pilot and the practical applications of what he has to do in his life to compensate for something that a lot of people say he should have to compensate for. And Jason and Jay Chris is doing an awesome job. Yeah, can I get some thumbs up here? We have 100 people watching and barely 30 thumbs up. And the way the logarithm works, at least this week, is you've got to get the thumbs up for the channel to stay alive. And ostensibly, the channel has stopped growing. So the only way for this channel to grow at this point is because I'm not being recommended for whatever heresies I've committed. Is for all of you to start recommending in real life, or if you have your own blogs or whatever it is, this channel. Um, and I so 36, 37, perfect. If we can get that going, that would be really wonderful, everybody. But yeah, I think we should just reorient that. Listening from Alabama, wonderful. 2 thumbs up, everybody. Yeah, that's great. But yeah, that's the way I like that. Is there's your experiences that no one can take away from you, just like mine. What I argue about the Mandela effect. These are your real experiences, and as a pilot that's up there and in the air all the time, no one can take that away from you. And we can throw around, the Coriolis effect and math all day long and deep learning and all these other things. We can do that all day long. But the fact is, you're a pilot and you deal with this all day long. And while we're on that topic, have you ever seen anything bizarre in the sky? Speaking of, let's touch all bases here. Have you ever seen a UFO or anything like that?
No, not while I'm flying. On the ground, I have, but not while I'm flying. What I have seen
Ooh.
is what appeared that the sun was below the cloud line close up, meaning that the sun was off to the horizon, and as it was setting, then it went below the cloud line and it was shining underneath the clouds. And I thought that was, and I'm not saying that I have a conclusion about it, I just thought that was really interesting that the light can shine underneath the clouds when it's so far away, when it's supposedly millions of miles away, or maybe not that far away. But those are the kind of things I thought, that's really cool. I like to see stuff like that. That gets me thinking. It gets me going. I wonder what that is. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it was just the angle of the light. Could be nothing. But I love the freedom of just not having my mind in a box anymore of, well, this is how it has to be because this is what I was taught.
Right.
And that
Right.
I encourage everybody to just go to the Great Circle Mapper. Just Google that. And I encourage people to go there and look at some flight paths. Maybe it'll get you thinking.
Yeah, and Jim, just say your piece, man. I know you want to get my attention. You have my attention. Just say your piece, Jim. Hey, Lanessa, how you doing? So, well, I'm just wondering now. Where do we go from here? What do you think is next? Oh, let me ask you that. What about chemtrails? Do other pilots talk about those? Because I see them. I know they're real. I send photographs all the time, that pre and post and all that. So, and what about no fly zones over the poles from Jim? Is that what you wanted, Jimbo? Um, anyway, he can answer later. But so those are two things I can throw at you: chemtrails and no fly zones over the poles. Do you know anything about that?
Oh, well, we fly through chemtrails, and it's fascinating and disturbing at the same time to know that we just flew through a path that a plane was just on, um, exactly through the same altitude. But people don't, when I talk about them to non-pilots, people are like, well, when the plane engines are hot, that's condensation. They don't understand that condensation, like your breath, when you go outside in the cold, you breathe, you see the smoke, but what happens? It goes away. The same thing with condensation. It doesn't stay around for hours and hours, and it certainly doesn't spread out to cover the skies. And that's what chemtrails do. And we fly through them, we fly over them, we fly under them, and I see with my own eyes these things. They come from the planes and then they spread out. They get really wide. They become synthetic clouds, basically, that cover up the sky. I don't know what they're made of. I don't know exactly why they're being done, but it is something that I notice.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah. I know they are geoengineering. It is a fact. There are multiple papers out there. I guess maybe Buster and myself can look around for that. And we can present those papers. And we present papers all the time that seem that don't get a lot of traction. They do with this audience, and I really appreciate this audience and everybody in here. But in terms of the larger audience, it really doesn't. Um, it really doesn't pick up. I've been talking for months about the gateway process, and finally people are starting to pick up on the idea of a holographic reality, and that's only because of the UFO UAP thing that's been coming around. So let's see, someone's talking about atmospheric aerosol injections, not chemtrails. Chemtrails are BS. I mean, you can get wrapped up, Dirk Myra, and I always put that, the language itself is something we could dance around. It's sort of like the UFO to UAP kind of sleight of hand. I mean, you can do that if you want, but we're still basically talking about the same thing. We're still talking
Sure.
about putting heavy metals, part and parcel of heavy metals inside of the upper atmosphere, so it'll do whatever it is they're saying it's going to do. It's still the same thing we're talking about. So
Sure.
what are we talking about in terms of the poles? Do you know anything weird about like everyone's freaked out about Antarctica. What do you know about Antarctica as a pilot? Do pilots talk about Antarctica? What's up with that?
Typically not. When a pilot, at least in private aviation, is going to go somewhere, they submit their flight plan, and that flight plan is not going to involve going over the poles, because it's going to be similar to how you would go to Great Circle Mapper and say, I'm going to go from A to B, and it plots the whole destination for you. On the plane, you type in, this is where I'm leaving from, and this is where I want to go, and it sets the flight plan for you. Don't really have to get into, well, maybe I want to go over this area. There's not any room for variation in that. And so it's not really an issue with in private aviation anyway when it comes to the poles, because the flight plans are kind of done for you. You put in, your departure and destination, and then it makes the flight plan for you.
And naturally, that they never ever go over, particularly Antarctica, but also I guess the North Pole. Oh, I would imagine the North Pole would be with all of the countries so packed in there. It would probably be kind of difficult because of, it's probably pretty sensitive around that area with, Russia and the US and things being the way they are right now. But in terms
Right.
of Antarctica, you're saying that right, right. It just never comes up, right?
No, I mean, if someone asks, like if someone on the plane, like a passenger, says, "Hey, are we able to do this?" Typically, the answers from the captains will be like, "Well, we can't fly over the poles because it creates a magnetic problem with the instruments." Kind of the same way when you're flying over the Bermuda Triangle. You know, I, when I've flown commercially before 9/11, I asked the flight attendant, "Can I go up and see the cockpit?" She's like, "Sure, come on up." And they knocked on the door. They, believe it or not, this is before 9/11. They're like, "Hey, come on in, have a seat, sit down." And I'm asking a million questions. Like, I was super excited to sit in a 747 seat of there and just see all the instruments. Hey, what's this do? How much gas we got? I was like a kid in a candy store. And the pilot said to me, he goes, "I'm just glad we made it over the Bermuda Triangle because it always messes with our instruments." And it's just, I thought that was really interesting for them to say. Me being a passenger, I could have flipped out and freaked out or something like that. But
Mhm.
I guess my point is there are real effects from magnetic interferences that could affect instruments. Now, is the truly flying over the North Pole, would it really affect the instruments? I don't know. I really don't know, because I've not, being in my industry, I've not had that opportunity to fly over the poles or even challenge, can I fly over the poles? It's just really not even asked.
Interesting. Devin, I'll check that out. Thank you for that. What about CERN? They have those insane pictures over CERN. Have you ever had the pleasure of flying over CERN, and what is it, at the border of France and Switzerland or something, like northern Italy or something like that? Have you had the pleasure of flying over that sort of circle there?
I've not flown over it. My understanding is it straddles two countries,
Hmm.
and CERN being, I guess, the name of the city, Cernunos or something that used to be a long time ago. Anyway, so yeah, I've not seen it. The short answer is I've not flown over that particular area to see it.
Okay. And besides the Bermuda Triangle, is there also I've noticed now that I have a pilot on. Think about this, everyone. How much of the things that we don't understand about the world have, a pilot is able to kind of enlighten us. And that should say a lot about how little we know about what's really going on off the ground. And that's just a sort of sidebar there. And how interesting that it must be up in the air like that all the time, all the time. It's just something, it just dawned on me that I'm getting all these questions from the chat because it just goes on and on and on. And I have to ask again, for my sake, I know Chick and myself, we always talk about places like the Bermuda Triangle in terms of its magnetic frequencies and just the bizarreness that goes on there. Are there other parts like in the US, like in the Southwest, that have those kind of anomalies like that that you wish you prefer to avoid flying over?
Nothing that I would want to avoid. Certainly places that are interesting to me, like Sedona, Arizona, supposedly has a lot of electromagnetic things going on. There's and this is not pilot related. This is just I'm fascinated by things like this.
Mhm.
People have told me stories about some of the rock arches that the sky looking through the arch is a totally different sky than on the outside of the arch. Sometimes people walk through them and don't come back. And I
Mhm.
thought that's really interesting. It's supposed to be a very spiritual place. I don't know. It's not really related to pilot stuff, but now that you have me asking me about places with electromagnetic uh, differences, that came to mind is Sedona, Arizona. I've gotten an opportunity to drive through there before, and it's just gorgeous and beautiful. And
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And I think there's places like that, like Sedona, Bermuda Triangle, Skinwalker Ranch, places like that. Those are the areas that we talk about in the Gateway Process, the
mm,
CIA document, where I think it's very, the code, so to speak, that create, because what's happening is in physics, they're slowly moving from the atomic model and they're moving more into something closer to, someone corrected me, from a binary to kind of a qubit model in terms of, because people don't really understand and know, atoms. They're not really, the way they were presented is not really exactly true. It's not real. And that we're moving from that. And I've actually talked to my contact about that, about it's, they're just not real the way that they were presented, and that we're
sure,
moving away from that. So it's kind of interesting talking to a pilot at that range, because you're sort of at the opposite scale. You're very high up and you literally have a 10,000-foot view. um, you kind of see down below, that as above, so below. You literally, as above, you're seeing things so differently now, than
yeah.
than down below. Before we wrap all this stuff up, is there any kind of like deeper truth you want to instill that I haven't asked, or anybody, and people in the chat too? Just get your, oh, I just realized this was on top chat. If I've been ignoring people, I'm so sorry. I try to keep it on live chat. I do apologize. Oh man, I don't even know what's the purpose of not having it on live chat. That's a bummer. Anyway, is there, you know, everybody in the chat, if you've got something you want to throw at me, I'm kind of flying solo. I'll try to take a look at it. And, do you have anything, you want to just you've always wanted to say to people who are very interested in these kinds of topics, other than what you've already said? Is there anything else that I haven't asked, because I don't know what I don't know?
Sure, man. And thank you for that opportunity. I appreciate that. Yeah, a couple things. One is an observation. When I'm on the ground and I see chemtrails or aerosol sprays, or however they're termed, and I see them spread out, one of the things I think about is maybe it's simple that now I can't see what's above them. I can't see what's going on above those fake clouds. And with all the UFOs coming out now and people are seeing them more, I just wonder, are they being sprayed so I just can't see what's going on up there? Is it just that simple? That I ask
Mhm.
myself that. Because when you're up above 15, 20,000 feet, there's a lot of sky up there. There's a lot that can go on. There's a lot that can be happening up there. And if you have some clouds that are being falsely created at 10, 15, 20,000 feet, and now you can't see above that, then it gives plenty of reason to hide, or it gives a way to hide what's going on up there. that's more of an observation. I could it be really that simple, just to kind of block out what's going on up there, so until the timing of when these things want to be revealed to the public.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. One of the things I would encourage your listeners to do is don't be afraid to be offended. It's okay, because that's how we grow. If what I say offends you, or if you learn something that you're just like, man, that is so offensive, that goes against my religion, or that goes against this, it's okay. Don't let that stop you from learning. I encourage people to not let that stop them.
Yeah, yeah. I think, yeah. There's a lot of conflation between an emotional response and then a critical response, and oftentimes, we get so wrapped up in the emotional response, and that's part of the dominance that's bestowed on us in the system. Is that it's an entirely emotional system in terms of how we interact with one another and in terms of how you maintain control of the situation. It's all the arguments, I'd say, in the last 50 to 60 years in terms of science and all these other things, they're based on the emotion of shame, ridicule, the feeling of feeling lesser than, all of those kinds of things. It's all based in that, and any kind of questioning of that. And, I think that it's a shame that it takes people who are brave in terms of their fields, that they have to speak up and they have to do it, with this anonymity. And in a lot of ways, it really shows you the system that we live in truly is not free. It really isn't. And I think there's a broader freedom when you're younger, you think about. And then when you get in, and the reason why they even had to create the phrase, the real world, it's like a rite of passage almost. Like you graduate into this rite of passage of knowing that you're going into a world. The adult world is a world of cynicism. It's a world that is very dishonest. It's a world that relies on emotional ridicule. And then finally, if you won't back down from that, then ultimately you'll be fired. And then all the things that you've been emotionally trained to want, they'll be held back from you, whether it be that sports car or the big TV or whatever it may be. So and that way it's kind of the perfect system, and it's incredibly effective with people. And
Hmm.
I think what's the biggest change that's starting to happen right now, and why I even feel emboldened to bring on people like yourself, is that I see it even on massive shows like Joe Rogan, where it's starting, the tide is turning on skeptics, and they're starting to get wailed on. And he even said, if you're skeptical, and I've been saying this for much longer, but now I know it's filtering up to broader shows. If you're a skeptic, you're simply ignorant. You're either not paying attention, or you're trying to hold on to old systems that are simply dying off. I don't know what the new systems are going to be that are coming into place, but they are coming, and they are upon us, just like this UAP UFO thing is upon us. You no longer have the comfort of being a skeptic, and there is no bravery in being a skeptic. There is no heroism in that. The truth itself has always been subjective, and if you want to do the but science argument, I challenge you to go to a science book of, let's say, I don't know, the 1930s. And let's go the 1930s in Germany and compare them to right now. And that's your but science argument. And that's what I say to the but science argument. And again, I preach this over and over again. It's going to be, I know you just had Bob Lazar on, Evil Monkey. That's why I brought this up. And that's why the phrasing that he gave, because the tide is turned with UFOs. They're real. They are here, and they've always been among us. And that's a fact.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
all the control systems that belittled people and made fun of them, not only are they're going to, because skeptics ultimately that belittle people, like, ultimately they're cowards. They're going to, and because of that, they will recede ultimately. And now I say is our time to kind of shine out and start to ask the bigger and broader questions. And it really helps with subjects like this, and on broader platforms like Bob Lazar talking on Rogan. So that's a very important piece of this puzzle. And he said it, skeptics, you're just at this point with where the science is at, where everything else is at, you're not aware, you're not informed. And I say that about atheists. I say that about most everything out there that was the dominant culture, and that belittled you with just a wink and a nod, particularly the real subtle stuff that is just sort of the kind of the inflection of your voice as an interviewer is talking to someone who knew about aliens just 10 years ago, heck, just 10 months ago. And I
Yeah,
think, I think that, and self contented, I try to keep things rated G here because I would like to have all people feel comfortable, and that's why your stuff isn't showing up. But I do agree about the nanoparticulates in our body, and that's all around us. You're not being actively censored by me. It's just part of the controls that are in place right now.
sure.
Okay, so more than 100 people watching. Can I get 100 thumbs up before the show is over? It would be incredibly helpful. Everybody that's out there, please share this video in particular. Please like, share, subscribe to this channel, tweet it out. I can't get on Facebook. I gave them Rasputin. They wanted my face, so I gave them Rasputin's face, and obviously that wasn't good enough. For some reason, Facebook wants my face. I'm not, because I'm not on Facebook, and I didn't want to give them my face. So, that's what I think about Facebook. So share it, share this on Facebook, and get this conversation that I just had here with a pilot, someone who's up in the air. So James, thank you so much for being here and coming on SMQAI. We really appreciate it. And to the
Yeah,
audience, thank all of you very much for coming back week after week, time after time. And I guess I'll see you guys actually tomorrow, right? It's Friday. So Chick and I will be back with the Lost and Found bin. Then obviously on Sunday, I'll be on the Truth Frequency Radio. I did recently do a interview with Chris Jericho, and that will be coming out in a couple weeks here. He said, I don't have a timeline specifically. He told me that I am booked and it will be airing in a couple weeks. So look out for that. His go to Talk is Jericho at Talk is Jericho, and it's Westwood One Podcasts, and it's called Talk is Jericho. So I'll be coming out on that. I don't know, in the next couple of weeks. So just look out for that and sub to him. And then that's pretty much all I got right now. Thank you, James. And
yep.
anytime I have more questions, I'll hit you up. And if you want to come back sometime, well, I'd enjoy having you back.
I appreciate it. Thank you. It's been an honor to be on your show, and I appreciate it very much.
All right, thank you. All right, bye bye.
All right.